When a custom color shows up on Reverb with a weird serial number, that's how I knew this was the one. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Tonight we're going to talk about the Gibson ES-347. It's a model that was first introduced in 1978, lasted until 1991, and there's surprisingly little information about it on the internet. So let's start there. What is an ES-347? When it comes to semi-hollows within Gibson's lineup, typically people think of the ES-335, so I'm going to use that as the base model today. It's a center block semi-hollow guitar with a dual cutaway, typically with humbucker pickups. From there, you can go to the 345 to get a little bit ornamentation on it, and then you could step up to a 355, which is kind of like the Les Paul Custom of the ES-335 world. It's got the ebony fretboard, the block inlays. Depending on the year, you can get veritones on those past two and this one. But then you also have things like an ES-330, which is kind of like a 335, but without the center block. Sometimes they have the short neck, sometimes it's a long neck. It does get confusing, especially in the late 70s when they're introducing a whole bunch of small model variations of the 335. So, 347, think of it as a step above an ES-345, but not quite 355 status yet. So we've got things like the bound headstock, we've got the ebony fretboard with the big block pearl inlays. Oddly enough, like a 335, we just have the single banded binding along the body on both sides. You might notice that this guy has an additional three-way toggle switch up here and down here. What's going on there? This is actually a coil split switch, and regular 335s of this era also had that. But then we have things like gold hardware, whereas a regular ES-335 in 1979 looked like this. They were actually still rocking trapeze tailpieces. So when we come back over here and have a stop bar variety, that's when things get kind of interesting. Now you might notice this doesn't look like a regular stop bar tailpiece. That comes down to the other differences that makes these special. So besides just our tailpiece, it's actually the new Rendell Wall creation, the TP6 fine tuning adjustment tailpiece. These were used on like BB King Lucille models in the future. This tailpiece allows you to do some fine tuning. Now you might think, hey, this isn't a violin. These tuners are way more accurate than what you would use on those. Why on earth would I need that? The answer's on the box. Right hand fine tuning while you're playing. So say you're hitting some fancy jazz chord over here and your B string is sounding slightly off, but it's a long standing note and you're embarrassed on stage. Here you can just go boop, and you're good. Very few people actually use it like that. Most people nowadays, they just like it for the look. But another unique thing about our 347 friend, look around our bridge and tailpiece. We'll take a closer look at this on the workbench, but it actually has a brass block insert called Sustain Sisters that goes into the center block that's supposed to help the guitar sustain for longer. You'll also notice things like a stock brass nut. Gibson was toying around with this in the late 70s, early 80s. We also have the then improved M6 Gibson Schaller style tuners instead of a regular Kluson style. Many of these also have a posilock. Unfortunately, this one does not. And originally, this would have had Series 7 tarback humbuckers in here, but unfortunately, somebody's replaced them. And while the black pickups does work really well with this finish, we are going to be restoring it today as I found a nice set. So quick recap, slightly different pickups, fancier parts, and a little bit fancier ornamentation. That is the 347 in a nutshell. However, it was produced a long time, so there's many different iterations. The first one, as we discussed, is 1978. That is the only year that has an oddly satisfying single bound headstock with an engraved truss rod cover. There's a celebrity endorsement talking about how wide the neck is and how he likes that. However, from 1979 till about 1983, you have the second iteration, which introduces the 355 style headstock as far as being 7-ply bound, and you have your screen printed truss rod cover. Let's call that version 2. Now version 3, I think it starts somewhere in mid 83, definitely by 84. They change up this model a lot. Something you might have noticed about the earlier iterations is the tailpiece is oddly far down the body. Why is it like that? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they were trying to mimic the trapeze tailpiece's location, but in stop bar format. But it's here where they revert it to a more normal placement. They decide the dual toggle switch thing is kind of confusing, and they swap over into a Les Paul artist style mini toggle switch right by the three-way. They also decide to ditch the brass nut at this time for a more regular styled one, and it appears it's around this time when they start to offer factory Kaler options. That's right, you can go crazy on a semi-hollow. So let's call that Generation 3. I believe there's also a Gen 4 that's like late 86 until 1991 when they do a pickup change. It might have happened before then. Again, I'm not an expert on these 347s, but it's possible that they might have did different pickups. But I know by 87, they updated the product spec page and introduced something called the Spotlight pickup, which we've talked about before in the Les Paul Custom Light series. And those just held on to those pickups until its discontinuation in 1991. So 4-ish generations to this model. What colors could you find? The 3 common colors are ebony, natural, and antique sunburst. Now in antique sunburst, it ranges from like a tobacco sunburst into a vintage sunburst. Tobacco being more of a brown border, vintage sunburst being black. Some of that's due to aging, some of it's due to they just shot it differently. That's pretty much all you'll find in the first couple of generations. However, in the 80s, it appears that they also introduced a heritage cherry sunburst. Now you might notice I didn't say anything about Silverburst. Now we need to get into custom colors. I have seen at least one advertised as original plum purple, although I'm uncertain if that was factory original or not. I remember making that Would You Rock or Not episode and wanting like a little bit more detailed photos before I signed off on that, but it sure does look cool. In 1984, there appears to have been an employee ordered bargain stamped custom shop original white one with a Kaler just for extra fun. But now we've got Silverburst to add to our documentations. Where did this come from? Well, Olivia's Vintage found it. They posted it on Reverb for like 5,500, to which I said, yes, I've been waiting for the right one of these to document, and Silverburst is definitely there. They just thought it was some sort of a custom color. They've never seen another one, and I agree. I can't find a single different one online. However, when I looked at the serial number, this is what made me contact him and say, yeah, I'm buying that. Because the guitar's value really depends on its history, and I believe this to be a 1980 NAMM show display piece. Due to this really wonky looking hand-stamped serial number with a Made in USA stamp going the incorrect direction for a Kalamazoo made guitar. Where have we talked about this before? The super standard. Feel free to check out my recent redocumentation of that guitar. But due to some very good circumstantial evidence, I've been tracking guitars with serial numbers 72089, and they all seem to have some sort of a coil splitter switch to them with other unique specs. So for example, Silverburst, the first full year of that finish is 1979. It was prototyped in 1977, and it had a half year in 1978 in the back half. So being a Winter NAMM show display piece, I'm sure they still want to get the word out about Silverburst, so they did up one of these weird 347s that has the factory coil splitter switch up here, and they wanted to show it off in a unique way. Now again, I don't have any photographic proof at this point in time, but I've been tracking these weird serial numbered ones, and that's a match to me, so I definitely believe these were part of some sort of a set. Don't forget there's also that The Les Paul that has a 2550s neck with the coil splitter switch too. All with the strange serial number, dating to July 27th. So you tell me, is Silverburst a good color on a semi-hollow Gibson? Occasionally you will find Silverburst 335s. That's more of like a 2000s era thing when they first bring the finish back. And if you're wondering why the headstock's not bursted, that's typically how Kalamazoo would do theirs. So that's not all that uncommon, but it's nice that they still bursted the edges of the headstock. Now, does our case or case candy hold any additional proof to that? Unfortunately, no. There's no paperwork in here. And this is an extremely late 80s, early 90s version of the case anyway, so it's not original to the guitar. But a couple of unboxing episodes ago, I told you I got this case and there might be a special guitar that would fit in it. The yellow interior does look very nice and matches the unique case that the Super Standard has. However, I just don't think the fit is quite good enough, and this is very clearly 60s era. So I ended up buying it another 70s case, and we'll unbox that another day. I was a fan of Silverburst before it became, super ultra mainstream popular. So I always thought a semi-hollow would look good in this finish. So it all just lined up to add this one to my collection, I guess you could say. So let's go ahead and throw it over onto the workbench. It'll be a pain to work on it, but I think I've got a plan of how to get the original style pickups back in here that doesn't require fishing around in this guitar. But let's go ahead and see my results here. Well, here we go. Doesn't she look beautiful restored to her former glory? Not gonna lie, that was quite the labor of love, but I think I finally got it. So let's go ahead and check out the stock pickups. This model came with the Series 7, which would have looked something similar to this. It's a tar back epoxy coated pickup that has dual leads coming out of it. Why do we need 2 leads? Because one goes to this one, which is our coil split switch. Even though this looks like a 3-way toggle, it does not go to the neck position. It's just full mode and split mode. This one down here is what selects your pickups like usual. The later revised ones just goes to a regular 2-way toggle right in this area, which I think is a great revision. This is really confusing, weird stuff. But here's a look at our neck tenon extending into our body. And if you want to know the trick to working on semi-hollows that are already completed, you just cut the pickup leads and you splice them together. That way you don't have to fish around with things. It's helpful if you cut the pickup leads short and then you don't have all this extra stuff. But here's our bridge pickup. You can see our cavity looking pretty normal. And you can see your multiply poplar maple top with your spruce bracing before you get to that maple center block. And here's the backside of our bridge pickup. If you're curious what somebody put in it, it was the Bill Lawrence L510. In both positions. But when I bought the guitar, I thought, oh yeah, that's the original pickup rings. I can just reuse those. No, those were custom for these. And unfortunately, I did not have 70s era pickup rings around, but I did have 2000s era. They're not the best fit, but if I squish them, they still fit in the same screw holes, so I'll probably continue replacing those another day. And when I first bought these Series 7s, I was a little sad about how they were kind of worn and tarnished, but it's such a rare pickup to find for sale separately. But this guitar actually ended up being a lot more beat up and played than I was expecting when I first bought it, so in a roundabout way, it works. But now having these pickups in, it made me realize, here's another thing that's different about this, and what might have made it show up to the NAMM show in this configuration. Generally speaking, Silverburst never came stock with gold hardware. It's typically a chrome model, so that kind of adds to the uniqueness of this. Not only is it a semi-hollow in Silverburst, but it's gold. I think it kind of works now that it's got a little bit of a golden hue to it in and of itself. As far as your pickup rings within the circuit, the neck is 15.35 k ohms in full coil mode, and then when you split it, you get about half at 7.9. Now, I'd love to show you the bridge pickup, but it seems by slightly touching it to show you guys the insides, I knew how this was going to go again. The wires keep grounding off on something in here and it makes it not work. It's so frustrating. I've been dealing with that, and these pickups had another tab welded on them at one point, and the guy I bought them from said, oh yeah, I'll tap those for you. And then when I got it, turned out it wasn't tapped. Had to do that by hand because I don't have the right tools for that job. Needless to say, I've been through it, but I've done it once and I'll do it again. We'll get it fixed up. Now let's move on to our bridge and tailpiece. So the bridge itself, not that special. Just your regular golden Nashville style, made by Schaller over in Germany. But underneath the usual thumb wheels is what we were talking about earlier, the sustain sisters. If you pull those out of the body, it's basically like your regular anchoring system, except for it's just much more massive and made out of a brass block. A lot of high-end models like the 25-50th anniversary also came with these. But I've told you guys about this phenomenon many a times, but this example is really easy to see it on. If you're wondering why the finish is turning yellow around these posts, it's because the sustain sisters originally had a little rubber gasket around them, and they do deteriorate and flake away over time. This one still has most of it, but you can see where it's cracking. But it's just like a non-nitro safe stand, how they mar your finish. It's doing the exact same thing. It's just you don't notice it on like the Tobacco Sunburst guitars. Has to be natural, Silverburst, etc. But your tailpiece studs have the exact same anchoring system. Here's a look at our TP6 tailpiece. You can see the coating of the fine tuners is definitely worn. But this is one of the few USA-made hardware parts of Gibson. But now let's talk about our controls. We already talked about this one. Coil split, regular 3-way toggle. Did they mess with anything here? No, it's just regular bridge volume, bridge tone, neck volume, neck tone, output jack on the front. Now we'll take a second to run the light along here. By no means was this thing trashed, but you can see lots of scratches, nicks and dings. This was not a case queen by any means. It was probably gigged out by what I gather from the condition here, but unfortunately I do not have the detailed history of this one from the previous owner. You can see some deep gouges and scratches over here, but that's okay. The Silverburst finish pulls it off very nicely. You can see where the pressure of the pick guards actually even chipped the finish a little bit right there, and then some more scratches over here. here. Speaking of the pickguard, here it is. It's got scratches all over. But sure enough, a golden bracket. And here's what the backside looks like. But what I find really cool is if you look inside the F-hole right there, you can tell the maple they used on this, despite not being able to see it, it actually has some pretty decent figuring to it. So let's break out the endoscope and take a look on the insides. And we'll start on the base side F-hole. Starting with our Gibson sticker, Gibson Incorporated, Union made. It's got our model ES-347 and where it was made, Kalamazoo, with our Norlin era logo. But I was curious if we would find anything else in here like NAMM show marking written on the underside or something, but you can't see your spruce bracing right here joining onto your maple center block, and then you've got that same spruce bracing on the underside to brace it against the sandwiched maple top and back. And then the sides are made out of the same stuff as the top, and then you get your kerfed edge along here. So this is your cutaway area, which gives you something to glue the top and back to. So that runs along the edges, then that's your cutaway sharpest point right there where they put a different wooden block. Now looking down towards the bottom strap button, you can just see more of the same. And now we can poke around on the inside of this one where we can see more of the same. Your output jacks there. More curved edges. This is kind of cool. You can see some of the silver paint run off along the edge of the F-hole. Looks like our pot code's just a little bit too covered over right there. Our next one looks about the same. Nice and covered on that one. And looks like the other one is also covered. But now let's come over here. This is what that toggle's looking like. Definitely is constructed differently than a three-way switch. And you can see more of what we saw on the other side. And right here what we're seeing is the bridge pickup cavity where they cut away some of that maple center block and you get all your wiring going through. And you can see just how thick the spruce bracing is. All things considered, they actually cleaned that up pretty well. Moving on from the body, not that you can see it, it is a three-piece maple neck. We can verify that in our truss rod cavity route. And I've got to say, this guitar feels so ridiculously neck heavy. Like you can tell all the weight in this thing comes from the neck. I don't know if that's going to be a good or a bad thing, but this had a lot of finger cheese going on our fretboard, but I got most of that cleaned off. Nice and conditioned, but you can tell somebody played this thing. It's got some flattening fret wear to it. But this is an ebony fretboard with true mother of pearl block inlays as we were talking about earlier, and it is single bound. But let's get our neck dimensions. Our brass nut is about 1.69 inches, so not really that different. 2.06 is definitely not the widest neck we've ever seen. That's a pretty slim 0.79 first fret neck depth. 0.97 by the 12th. Frets seem to be of similar width and height as usual, so I don't really think they did anything different there. However, do you notice your 12th fret side dots? That's one way to verify if it's made in Kalamazoo or not, is a lot of the KZ made ones will be more spaced apart than the Nashville style. However, the real test is to shine a bright light on it. If you see red, that's how you know it's the tortoiseshell colored ones, and that is definitely Kalamazoo. Here it is at the first fret and the 12th fret, but you can see it's a little bit more rounded in your chording area, and it flattens up just a tad while staying a C shape. I measure a 24 3/4 inch scale and a happening 12-inch fretboard radius. If you notice, the brass nut polished up nicely. That's one of my favorite things about working on these older Norlin era guitars that have the brass nut stock. It's so effortless to shine those things up with a little bit of steel wool. Takes them from looking dull to looking magnificent. But here's our headstock. Regular Gibson logo of the era. Nice and blocky. We've got the crown inlay that many of these semi-hollows are known for, just with the super custom ultra multiply binding around the edges. Truss rod's in phenomenal condition. And here's an up-close look at the screen printed version of the ES-347. Now that I know about the differences of the first year, I definitely need to document one of those. And here it is all strung back up. As soon as I start the recording, pickup goes wonky again. I'm tired of messing with this thing. We're just going to demo it how I have it. I did notice something interesting though. Once I got the strings back on, all the block inlays are in the wrong position. They're like just slightly too close to the top fret. That's pretty embarrassing for Kalamazoo. This one's really noticeable, but then once you notice that, yeah, you see it for all the other ones. But now flipping over to the backside, this cleaned up nicely. However, there's a lot of buckle marks back here that are kind of hard to see. Like a lot of scratches in this area, quite a few nicks and dings. As I was telling you guys earlier, this one was definitely played by someone. Or you know what? Maybe this was just at the NAMM show. Somebody had like this big gaudy belt buckle on and marred it up. I mean, it's possible. We've got that typical line where the neck meets the body. However, I don't see anything like shifting or moving. Although oddly, the finish is like scratched up in that area. It's not deep or anything. It's really just in the clear coat. But when you catch it in the light like that, it does look kind of gnarly. We can look around our edges real quick. See our cool Silverburst finish. Here's a good angle to see some of those other scratches. And then we've got some scuffs over here. This is a really ridiculously heavy feeling guitar because of that neck. Moving up the back, they didn't quite get the burst shape, the usual pattern. It's a little bit smaller than normal. But here's our volute area. You got a small finish chip right here. Otherwise, it appears to be good with our Gibson branded Schaller M6 tuners. There's a good close-up of our serial number, dating it to the 208th day of 1979, production number 15, made in USA. And of course, it's been dinged up against the top of something. Custom colors, you definitely want to blacklight them to see if everything's even or if there's any funny business. So far on the top, I would say everything looks good here. Knobs glowing the way I would expect. Here's a good area to check, the face of the headstock. Sometimes people won't bother refinishing the face because it looks good and it's not changing color. So you want to compare the glowing here to the glowing there. That's not a foolproof system, but I would say everything looks good to me here. And flipping over to the back, I would say everything matches. Looks like our neck has some sort of a stand rash on it right there. Otherwise, I was kind of surprised to not see any finish wear. That happens a lot on Silverbursts. And this one appears to have been played a lot, but they must not have the type of sweat that eats through the finish. And the backside of our headstock is looking good too, as does the neck joint area. I would confirm this as a custom color. I told you it was heavy. How much does this semi-hollow weigh? Nearly 10 pounds. 9 pounds, 13.4. And it's all in the neck. Maybe some in the center block too. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and kind of hear how it sounds. Alright, that's a little bit of a taste of the tones of how I could get it back in. What the bridge is doing is somewhere it's grounding off where it's not actually running full humbucker mode. It's kind of like somewhere in between. Like the readings generally range from like 9 to 12 when it's supposed to be 14 in full humbucker mode. So that's why you still kind of hear that single coilness to it, even in the main mode. The pickups do work. It's just they need spliced better, I guess. I don't know what's going on. I give up. Which is a shame, because this is like one of the first times I've actually liked the Series 7 pickups. Here's that neck position. interesting, on the dirty channel, the neck pickup just kind of stays muddy, even in coil split mode. Like, you can still hear it's got a little bit of a nitty-grittiness to it. But as far as chord, a little bit more full sounding. And our bridge, again, excuse it, it's not in its full humbucking state. It sounds pretty good. I mean, this is a semi-hollow we're talking about. This is really nice and hard rocking. So there we go, an exceedingly rare Silverburst ES-347, which I believe to be a NAMM show display piece for the year 1980. What are my final thoughts on this one? I'm glad I picked it up to review and document. Glad I took the time to restore it. Wish I could have got it perfect, but trust me, I tried like 5 hours. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. It was working fine until I started recording again, and then yeah, whatever. One day I'll have a professional do all the good shrink tubing and everything with it. But I'm really glad we got to see this one with restored original pickups. So you guys tell me, Silverburst work on a semi-hollow or not? In my opinion, yeah. I think it's really cool. Overall, as a model, I can see why guys liked these as far as the versatility. However, for me, the neck profile is just not it. It's a little bit more rounded than the Les Paul Customs of this era, which are known for being wide and thin. And for some reason, it's just really fatiguing to my hand, because the more I played it, the less wide it felt. It started to feel more like what the numbers were suggesting. And acoustically, it projects pretty nicely, but I almost wonder if you'd be better off with a modern day creation that's not quite as heavy. But there you go, the ES-347. Hopefully that helps you understand these things better. Basically just a 335 with the blending of all the other specs in a roundabout way. All right, troglodytes, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.